This is our league, and this is your league. From the 55-yard line on CFL America Radio and the Sports History Network.
There's a professional football league that believes having fun is the most important business at hand. USFL, where football is still a game.
The preceding message presented on behalf of the United States Football League.
Hi, I'm Oz Davis of the True the Goats podcast here at the Sports History Network. I'd like to take a minute to tell you about quite possibly the greatest website of all time, newspapers.com. If you're listening to this podcast, or any of them at the Sports History Network, you're probably into sports history. And you probably also know that for learning about anything prior to, say, 1990 online, the typical search engines like are nearly completely useless. But then there's newspapers.com. Newspapers.com gives you access to over 640 million pages worth of news from North America, Britain, Ireland, and more, dating from 1798 to last week. Do up a search for Super Bowl I, the 36th Berlin Olympics, Wayne Gretzky's first game, whatever. Newspapers.com takes you there with historical flavor that search engines like just don't give you. And now, get a free 1-week subscription to newspapers.com by visiting sportshistorynetwork.com/newspapers. With a paid subscription, you'll also be helping to support the production of this podcast and other Sports History Network shows. That's sportshistorynetwork.com/newspapers. Newspapers.com. Way better for searches than you know what I'm talking about.
Welcome to the 55-yard line with Scott and I today. And on our show today, we're going to have guest Jeff Pearlman to talk about the USFL. But before then, it's Scott and I. We're going to kind of review where we're at. Last time, it's been, Scott, how long has it been? It's about a month now since we sat down.
Feels like a lot longer than that. I wasn't even sure who you were when I saw you there. So
well, the hair has grown out, and I've flown many miles since then. So it's nice to come back and see you and sit down and do this and catch up on life and football. So
I'm wearing my Birmingham, even though no one can see us. I'm wearing my Birmingham Stallions T-shirt today in honor of our guest. So
nice. Yeah, we're Jeff Pearlman will be on after we do kind of our shtick here. We're going to talk a little CFL, and we're going to talk the current news of the day. So let's start with the CFL. Playoffs are here. Did you watch any of the games here towards I'll be honest with you, it's been hard for me because I've been kind of on the go, and with the way the schedule's been to sit down and pretty much watch a full game. But the final standings are kind of in a way kind of how I kind of figured they were all going to kind of lay out. I mean, you got 3 in each division. Do we have 3 in each?
Yeah.
We do, unless I misspoke, but we got 3 teams in each division, and the playoffs are starting.
Well, before the season started, I had Hamilton at 12-2, so I missed that just a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I kind of figured Winnipeg was going to walk away with it, though and Toronto, with the way they picked up free agents and everything in the off season, I mean, they did not. The only place they disappointed, obviously, was in the attendance, but. And the attendance, obvious. I mean, you've seen the latest. I mean, God, they had like 6,000 in for their last game, and Edmonton's been having attendance issues. So it's going to be interesting to see where we go from here.
Yeah, this has been, as far as the season goes, it was great to get it back, even though it was 14 games or whatever. But it was close to a full season. But for me as a Tiger Cats fan, as a CFL fan in general. The games for the most part, and again, I'm kind of like you. I've sort of just kind of been hit and miss on them, but they haven't been nearly as engaging as I'd hoped. For some reason, I was thinking maybe, this was going to be this really wild season. You'd have a lot of shootout style games, but it's just, if this was the first exposure fans had to the CFL, I'm not sure it would necessarily win them over.
Right. Well, I'm not used to seeing defense in a CFL game, and all these games, a lot of them were low scoring. In some cases, the games were kind of sloppy.
Yeah, they really did. And It's again, the way it started and coming off COVID and everything. I'm trying to just look at this as sort of a bridge season, and hopefully when they come back next June, there'll be, a lot more 35 to 29 type games and stuff. But yeah, it's just, I think I had it in my head. I was so excited about the return of the CFL. I think the fantasy couldn't have matched the reality regardless, but I think the reality has been a little bit less than maybe what we expected. So,
right. And, and also too, if the CFL is trying to attract new viewers, and obviously not only new probably, new viewers up in Canada, but down here. And, the games are on ESPN Plus, and I'll be honest with you, they're kind of hard to find on ESPN Plus. So unless you know what you're looking for, it's hard. Unless somebody I want to see a CFL game. But if you're just a general fan in passing, when you're on ESPN Plus, you don't realize that there's a CFL game on with the way the channel selection is.
Yeah, the way I've learned to do it is I just drop down and just, scroll until my thumb gets really, really tired. And by that point, you've usually hit the CFL game, because it comes after all the college, it's all the football, volleyball, soccer, everything else.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. You've got to be motivated to find the games, when you're looking for them.
Right. Yeah. So, well, hopefully, the hope springs eternal. And speaking of spring, we've got the quote unquote USFL coming out here in the spring, which is you and I, the purist, the old guys in us and the purists. No, it's not really the USFL. It's just the spring league with a new label placed on it.
Yeah. I'm so curious because when they released their, all the information that they released about it, here's everything you need to know. Well, it really wasn't everything you need to know. We still don't know who the 8 teams are. We still, they said that they didn't know where the location was going to be, but I think we're pretty sure it's going to be Birmingham.
No, you got that going. At least for a dude like you, man, that's going to be heaven for you to be able to.
Yeah. If it's here, I'll certainly go watch it. But getting back to the earlier point, what's it going to be? What's the pay scale going to be? Is it going to be something similar to what they tried in the last iteration of the XFL and the Alliance of American Football? Because if you're paying, decent money, you can get these guys who are just missed NFL guys, and you've seen some of these guys, these XFL veterans who have made NFL rosters and made impacts, so if you have a league like that, that's going to be great. But again, I just don't know what it is. I would like to have, before I get overexcited or completely bummed about it, I would just like to know what their plan is. And I don't think anybody knows yet. Well, I guess maybe the people at Fox know since it's their league, but they're not telling us.
Yeah. And the information's kind of come dribble. Just up recently, they finally got an official they got a social media presence. So,
yeah,
information is there's more speculation obviously than it's kind of like with the XFL CFL talks, there's more speculation than information coming out, right? For you and I I'm just hoping to see some of the team colors and uniforms that we saw, you're a little bit older than me, but when I was in high school, and in particular, hopefully we got San Antonio Gunslingers.
Well, see, that's where I'm different. And I've already said I'm a fogey. I'm an old goob when it comes to this kind of stuff. But, I like to remember the old USFL for what it was. So I would much prefer that the new teams, whatever cities they represent or whatever, would be new logos, brand new nicknames. Instead of the Birmingham Stallions, again, the Birmingham Battalion, just something different,
Right.
But to your point, I won't deny if I go out there and there's a team with gold hats and the lazy horse and the, red shirt and stuff, it'd be a nice little nostalgia trip.
Yeah.
A few minutes at least.
Yeah. And, I'm curious to see what the TV product's going to look like since it's going to be on Fox. I'm assuming it's going to be on, it's not going to be on the Fox app, but actually accessible. I have DirecTV, so hopefully it's going to be accessible for not that more of an extra cost than, unfortunately, for example, the NFL in their infinite wisdom this year decided to charge all us DirecTV customers an additional amount of money to get the Sunday ticket.
Oh, how sweet.
Yeah, well, I'm trying to explain that one to my wife, and wasn't. Well, let's put it this way. I told her, I go, hey, Cardinals are undefeated. So when she finally saw the bill, I go, I'm not gonna, we're gonna keep it this year. So we'll see. Obviously next year for me, I've got big changes coming up. Hopefully by this time next year, I'll be over on the other side of the world watching football. Not only football here, but also watching my Japanese football and covering stuff for the other podcast with Gridiron Japan, and actually broadcasting live, hopefully from some of the games while we do the
that'd
podcast.
be great.
That'd be awesome. So that's. But with that said, yeah, no, I'm like you. It's just like, yeah, the USFL. I mean, yeah, it's kind of. Well, we'll see. I mean, we've all been through this before, and I know, the XFL talk. Now, yeah, it seems like every time anybody from on the XFL side, meaning management, tweets out a little something, it's just they hop on it. And again, I love the passion of the XFL fans, but I'm like, until again, we're going to have this conversation, which we have had this conversation here with Jeff, but it goes back to kind of what I said with him. I mean, until the NFL couldn't make spring football work, I'm hesitant to put my heart and soul into anything.
Oh, me too. I mean, just, again, I'm as a Birmingham professional football fan, I'm 0 for 7. And then if you count the semi-pro teams, I'm 0 for 9. Well, 0 for a lot more. There's always a team that comes up. But see, this is another thing that, as someone who lives in Birmingham and loves Birmingham and wants Birmingham to succeed in everything, part of having the USFL hub here is it'll put the spotlight on Birmingham, which that's great. But what worries me is the spotlight is going to be on a stadium that has 1,000 people in it. Because I'm just thinking, the team that's branded the Stallions, hopefully they'll draw fairly well. But then when you have a couple of other teams playing, like say they're playing at Legion Field in an overflow game or something, and all the games are going to be televised and there's nobody there, it's going to be like, Joe and Jolene Blow out in California. Well, God, people in Birmingham don't care about football. It's like, no, that's not it.
Yeah. Well, and then
Anyway.
it also begs a question too. I mean, talking about, if you want to watch spring football, you're going to know where to find it. Is this new league going to attract the casual fan? History says that it won't, but I'm hopeful.
Yeah. We've had this conversation probably 100 times by now.
Oh yeah.
Any league that pops up, USFL, XFL, any FL you can come up with, we want it to succeed. I want any honest business to succeed. Right. I love for more football players to have more opportunities. I'm just looking for that, for someone to actually make it work. Because it just hasn't happened yet. And I want it, I truly do want it to happen, but it's just when you've been burned so many times, you have to, especially someone, that's our age, you kind of have to, tamp your expectations a little bit.
Yeah.
So,
the XFL, both versions had some great ideas, had some, obviously the first XFL with the Sky Cam, they brought some great, put some new innovations. These leagues bring something that the NFL takes and makes their own. And
I will say this: the original XFL, they had some great technical innovations. I didn't care for the football. Especially probably because Birmingham was 2-8. They were terrible, so I'd lost interest in that league pretty early on. But the most recent iteration of the XFL in 2020, I love the rule innovations. They had good talent. I thought it was a very good product. But, then the pandemic into that. So,
yeah. And, I'm like you, I want football to succeed. And obviously, our favorite league north of the border is still struggling, and it's going to be an interesting next year, I think, in terms of just where the CFL goes, especially with Toronto. Toronto and BC are still bothering me. BC has the upside with BC is they've got a new owner that really seems committed. But as you and I know, over the years, and every new owner, there's always hope springs eternal with every new owner. But the key thing is getting people into the stadium and people are watching the CFL. I mean, that much we know. It's getting them into the stadium, and you and I mean, I live in Chicago, which is a comparable city to Toronto. Hey, the Sox struggle at the gate, but the Sox do draw people. But I still don't get why people don't want to go to, watch football in Toronto. And
the Sox may struggle at the gate, but they have 80 opportunities, to kind of make up for it. So
they do. And, even the Cubs, the Cubs, the Cubs can be literally in last place every year. They're still going to draw at Wrigley. And speaking of Wrigley, this weekend, we've got Northwestern, I think in Wisconsin, playing at Wrigley. So if you're listening to this podcast and if you're looking for one college game to tune into, that's the one I'm tuning into.
Is that the one where they're going to have the short end zone or
no? They've you know what? I got to read the newspaper. I've not kind of brushed up on here on the game for this week. But okay, so for those who are listening to the podcast that don't know, the Bears played at Wrigley for 50 years, and they were able to squeeze a almost regulation size field into Wrigley Field. The exception being is on the first base side when part of the end zone was cut off by the dugout. So in the old films, in the old pictures, you see basically plywood covering the first base side dugout. And the reason why they played at Wrigley instead of, say, Soldier Field, in part was because Papa Bear was cheap and he didn't have to pay rent. So he just paid a percentage of the concessions. And, that's how football was back then. But when the leagues merged, they had to move to a new stadium, and they've been in Soldier Field ever since. And, it's a whole other conversation with them moving up to Arlington Heights. But
the more you know with Greg Smith.
Exactly. I drive my wife nuts. We were talking about travels. Was in DC last week, and pretty much boring my wife to death on a lot of little things, a lot of subtle nuance, a lot of minor trivia, especially when went to.
You're the Cliff Clavin.
podcasting. I am. And so we went to the Air and Space Museum, and if you've been to DC, right?
I have not. Oddly enough, I have not been to DC. Yeah.
Cool thing about DC is especially the Smithsonian. We were there a couple days, walked up and down the mall, Lincoln, from the Lincoln Memorial all the way to the Capitol. And that was a surreal feeling, just knowing after everything happened, January 6th, and just, it felt like we were in the eye of the hurricane.
Yeah.
And that's the only way to describe it. It was very surreal. I was in DC on 9/11, and I had a much different experience. And obviously that day changed the world completely. And for me, I still had memories of seeing that smoke coming, the aftermath of the plane crash in the Pentagon, seeing it from the mall and just kind of witnessing history firsthand, which in turn that day ended up leading me few years later out, spending a year in Iraq. But getting back to, I bored the crap out of my wife at the Smithsonian Air and Space, which was very cool because you got to see the Wright brothers' original plane. You got to see a Soyuz capsule. Got to see the one thing they did not have there was the Apollo 11 spacecraft with the command module, which apparently they had moved because they're doing construction. And I wasn't so much disappointed because here in Chicago, we have the Apollo 8 one, and it's been here for years. So technically that's the first man capsule that's been to the moon. So I didn't feel too cheated. And, talking football, at the gift shop at the hotel we stayed, they were still selling Redskins stuff, which I thought was weird. Yeah,
that is kind of.
So my wife's like, "What are you doing?" I go, "I am buying this now because, it was 50% off." So I got myself a nice Redskins hat, a couple, knit caps, and one of those 47 brand caps, and life was good for me. And but there wasn't.
No, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, I would just say along those lines, I might have already told you this. This was maybe a week after the original XFL folded back in 2000. And there's a sporting goods store in Birmingham called Hibbett's, and I was going in there to get golf balls or something totally unrelated. And I just looked up, and they had this big sign, fire sale or whatever. They had NFL footballs for $12, and all the caps of the 8 teams were $2.
Really?
So old Scooter here bought him a football and 8 caps for, whatever that was, $22 or something.
Now, were these
I mean,
are these like the caps like I like to wear, the relaxed fit, or are these different types of caps?
no, these were good, solid. I think I forget what the name brand was, but I mean these were the quality caps, and the ball was the official ball with the white lace, not the replica ball with the silver lace. I mean, it was an actual game ball. So
yeah,
I jumped on that.
Yeah. I got, eBay is a horrible, eBay is a dangerous place for me, but I ended up buying, there's only a few XFL jerseys I do not have. Again, version 1.1.0. And I got the smaller version of the ball, and I got the larger version of the ball. And I got I got the like mini helmets too. So I bought 2 mini helmet sets. I gave one set to my nephew. God only knows what he did with them, but I kept the other set. And, I'm like you, man, I just love, that's the one thing about football, and, my man cave, which is in the process of slowly being packed up for the next destination. I told my wife, I go, everything is negotiable in terms of what we're taking with us overseas, but not the football stuff.
Yeah. That's like, I've had that conversation with my wife too. I'm thinking, especially at my age, why do I need all this stuff? And I don't need any of it, but there are times I like to just walk in here into the fan cave and sit down. And I've had friends joke, because I tell them it's just a happy place for me. And they go, how can it be happy? Because everything's dead. They're all dead football leagues, dead hockey leagues, everything else. But it just brings back good memories.
Well, and it makes you feel young again too. I mean, we've got, coming up next week, we've got Ron Snyder coming on to talk about his book on the Stallions. And then also too, we've got another guest coming on at the beginning of December, Rich Podolsky, who is going to be talking with us about the NFL today, which, when I still hear that music from the 1970s, it takes me back to being a kid and turning on, watching Jimmy the Greek, watching Brent Musburger, Phyllis. I was more of a Jane Kennedy fan, but, watching that whole crew, because, back then, I have had these conversations, and I'll say straight up, there's too much pregame nowadays. Too much pregame, not enough NFL film stuff. And back then, you got both, just enough pregame and the perfect mix of NFL films, and you were set to go for the noon kickoff.
Yeah, I mean, my thing now, I don't even watch the pregame. I mean, it's just absurd. There's so much of it. But yeah, back in the day, and that was kind of the beginning of the NFL, I guess, for us, as being not just a football game, and also entertainment. So that kind of.
Well, that was great, with our conversation with Jeff here. We're all of that age where we remember when, cable was just beginning. And so, I mean, you got at least I did growing up. I mean, we didn't have cable until after I left for college. So I saw football the old fashioned way via an antenna and a little bit of snow in the background. So
I
get
remember that well.
Yeah. So, well, listen, guys, without further ado, and, we're going to pass, Scott and I are going to stop here and let everybody listen to our interview that we did earlier this morning with Jeff Pearlman. And we will be back next week and the week after that. And hopefully you're going to hear a little bit more from us. Probably not like the volume we put out over the summer, but a little bit more regular interviews as we go along into winter, especially towards the Grey Cup and into NFL playoff time. So without further ado, here is Jeff Pearlman. Hey, Jeff, thanks for joining us today. And, we're talking all USFL stuff today. And as, you and I, all three of us, I think, are in agreement in terms of just where we're at presently with the new league coming out. So we want to talk to you about the old league and everything about, Football for a Buck is one of my favorite books. And I know it's one of Scott's favorites. And so, hey, that's why we're here. And, as the senior writer here, I will let Scott lead off with the first question today.
Yeah. When I was reading your blog years ago, you had mentioned that I guess what led to your book about the USFL was a thesis that you did in high school. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was kind of interesting because when I was in college in 1980, I took a business class and we had to do a paper where we proposed a business. So I proposed a spring professional football league. I didn't realize that Dave Dixon had already done that. But when I read your blog and saw that you had written something about that, that was really fun to know that was kind of the jumping off point for you to really, take such a deep dive into the USFL.
I just want to say, first of all, how do you know David Dixon didn't steal the idea from you?
Ooh, yeah, that would be one of those time machine things.
Exactly. Yeah, I was, I'm probably like you guys. I was a huge USFL geek. Like I love the USFL and I was all about it. And I was in high school. Well, I remember when the USFL came out, and I remember the cover of Sports Illustrated, and I'm not just saying this, I can picture it in my head right now. It was Herschel Walker, New General's jersey, uniform, and it said hitting pay dirt. And that was the cover. And then you open the magazine and it was all the helmets in like a space-like background. And I used to, my parents wouldn't get Sports Illustrated because it was too expensive. So I used to go to the Mail Pack Public Library in my hometown. And I just remember opening that issue and being like, oh, whoa. And it's funny how like the things that do it for you when you're a kid, like things that now as we're older maybe wouldn't have the same holy cow, like mind-blowing experiences looking at these helmets and thinking like, wait, what? There's another league. They got Herschel Walker. Like that's insane. And so you fast forward, the league dies and it sucks. And I'm a senior in high school. My English teacher is a guy named Mr. Height. This is Mail Pack High School. And he says, we all have to do it was an AP English, I think. And it's like, we have to do a senior thesis. He called it a thesis. The thesis was 20 pages. That's to be 20 pages. And I pitched the downfall of the USFL. And he was like, I remember him being like, he was a sports fan, but he's like, do you really? Is that what you really want to write about? I was like, yes. And I handed in 40 pages, downfall of the USFL. And I just now, as an adult and as someone who's been an adjunct to professor, I always think of poor Mr. Height getting this 40-page paper. Like, I wouldn't want to read a 40-page paper written by me now, but 18-year-old me. I mean, can you imagine being this guy? I'm sure he's like, yeah, okay, that's good. That's good. B. Next. That's how it started. And I've always paper how to made that experience. And I just want to say one thing I remember from that is I had, you guys have probably seen these, I don't have one here, but the old USFL, they used to put out the sporting news used to put out an annual.
Oh yeah.
USFL annual.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
Right? Okay. On the back of them, weirdly, they had the phone number to the USFL offices, right? And in my little 18-year-old head, I just thought I'm going to call and maybe someone will answer a phone. And this is 1990. So the league died 5 years, technically 4 years earlier. I remember calling the number and getting an answering machine message. Hey, you have reached the USFL. Leave a message. And I was like, hi, my name's Jeff Pearlman. I'm a senior. And I'm sure it's like, I really am sure, because they certainly weren't leasing offices in Midtown Manhattan anymore. I'm sure it was like an answering machine in somebody's basement, like whoever, Harry Usher's basement, somebody's basement. I never heard back. So I left multiple messages, never heard back.
So this probably would have been the caretakers of what was left of the league, including the phone line and probably unused tickets.
A couple of footballs, a few helmets without decals,
Yeah.
A Donald Trump toupee, a couple of things.
Oh. Well, with the USFL, and there's one thing, and again, it's been a while since I've read the book, but there's one thing about the USFL that always, when I talk to people, when I talk to people now about the USFL, and I'm sure you've had the same looks, people just give a blank stare, don't remember it at all. And, obviously without getting into politics, but, the lessons learned from the USFL, for those of us in the know who remember what happened and how the USFL pretty much got driven into the dirt, So my question is in term with history, there's one player, historical player in the USFL that I don't think gets enough attention, and that's my favorite, Howard Cosell. When you were doing your research and everything, did Cosell come up quite a bit?
Well, the main place he came up is during the trial because he was one of the key witnesses for the USFL, and he was drunk on the stand.
Oh, classic.
And yeah, and that did not help. It is funny that this isn't quite US, but like the set of witnesses the USFL could have had versus did have was really a catastrophe. Like they had all these players ready to testify. They had different owners ready to testify. They didn't call any of them. And this is not being political. That was Trump's strategy with Harry Meyerson and with Roy Cohn before that, the two attorneys, was Donald Trump's going to be the star witness. And then we're also going to they call it Al Davis. And Al Davis was kind of a train wreck too. And they called Howard Cosell, a drunk Howard Cosell. And instead of making it this really sympathetic case of this upstart league being stomped by the bully, which really their best play if they were going to go through with this stupid lawsuit, that was their best play. We're an upstart. Right. The NFL is coming along and they're killing us and they're suffocating us. And you have one player after another come up on the stands and talk about, you get the guys, I don't even know, you get the whoever, the Larry Canadas of the league who like, this is my dream. This place has given me a dream, and the NFL has squashed us and killed us. And they didn't do that. So they went with the drunk Howard Cosell, a belligerent Donald Trump, and a confused Al Davis and a couple of others, and they lost sympathy. So when I think of Cosell in the USFL, I think of him actually harming the league by being a crappy witness who didn't add anything.
Yeah, I mean, that's what, as we all know what happened, because Cosell died, I mean, just like within a few years after all that too. And I think he was going through a lot of stuff, but the old stories go, he was never really sober for long. So to hear that story, because I didn't realize that he was pretty much loaded on the stand.
He died in 95, so it was about 10 years later.
Okay.
But that's not criticism, just so you know. I just looked that up. The thing is, all right, if you really think about it, what's interesting is the three main witnesses, what they all had in common was enormous egos and narcissism. Again, that is not a political, I'm not trying to like dog on Trump as president.
Right.
I could if you want. I'd rather not. But if you think about it, like Cosell, huge ego. Al Davis, huge ego.
Yeah.
Donald Trump, huge ego. And when you have witnesses who make it about themselves,
right?
Like Trump was a very bad witness. And that, again, I say for a minute time, that's not me being political like years later. That's talking to jurors, one in particular, who was like, he was belligerent. He tried to bully us. He tried staring us down. He made it about him. And so those witnesses, again, instead of having the sympathetic plight of poor players living their dream, having the plight of calling up guys who the NFL tried bribing away from the USFL, calling poorer owners who were being, bullied by the NFL. They didn't take that route. They decided to make it a very warlike affair, and they got destroyed.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. No, I was just saying when the trial happened, I guess I was 25 years old at the time. So I was a little more aware of the world. But the one thing that bothered me, I wanted the USFL to win the trial. I wanted the Birmingham Stallions to continue forever. But I kept thinking, they're moving to the fall. So this is going to fail. I mean, even if they win the trial and win all this money, it's like, does that mean that all these networks automatically just have to start throwing money at this new league? I mean, I never wanted it to leave the spring. And then when they went to trial, knowing that they were going to leave and go to the fall, I thought, well, great, maybe they'll win, but how long will they last? 1 year, 2 years? And then when will the NFL absorb the top two teams or whatever? I mean, I just, to me, even if they won as a fan who, didn't really have skin in the game other than just, really rooting for the Stallions, I thought even if they won, they eventually were going to lose.
It was upsetting. When you were saying that, I was thinking like as a fan, not as a guy who wrote a book or a journalist. Like, it was just upsetting because it was so selfish. And so it was never about the good of the league long-term. It really was about forcing a merger with the NFL. And
right,
like I said, fine and whatever, if that's your goal. But like, there were people like the three of us who love the USFL and actually really love the product. And there were guys, so many guys who this was their dream and they were getting paid to play professional football and they were loving it. And I would understand owners, like I would completely understand owners being like, I can't keep affording to lose money like this. I need to be out. Fine. But this idea that we're going to go to the fall. Okay, we're going to go to the fall. Half of our teams, more than half of our teams, are in NFL cities already. So that immediately, you can't have the Houston Gamblers and the Houston Oilers. You cannot win that. Certainly can't have the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Pittsburgh Maulers. You can't win that. Like you couldn't win. There was no win. And the thing that pissed me off about Trump, why in the book, is he's basically lying to the other owners and saying, oh, I've talked to the TV guys and they all say this is going to be great. None of them said it was great. None of them said it was great. Like they didn't want the three major networks did not want the USFL in the fall. And they were right. It was a stupid idea. Why would you broadcast USFL in the fall? From a fan standpoint, to this day, like I wrote that book with a lot of joy and a little bitterness. And the bitterness was because I felt like you want to, in your idealistic little kid mind, you want to think that they care about the fan and they care about you. And I don't think that was never about the fans. It was just about greed and wanting to be a part of the NFL.
Right. And if did the USFL, was there an offer on the table for them to continue in the spring from any of the networks beyond 85?
I mean, they had a deal with ABC and ESPN. They had the same deal they were going through, though. No one's going to change the deal. And they were trying to negotiate with the networks to obviously switch to fall. And ESPN and ABC had a strictly spring deal. So they still had a TV deal with the because the presumption was, is this going to continue in the spring? So once they decided to move to fall, though, all TV deals were dead. It was contingent on spring football. Right.
So there was money coming in with the TV deal had they stayed where they were.
Yeah, but it wasn't. The thing is, it wasn't like modern day TV money. Like It was good money. It was a good deal. A lot of the owners thought that Chet Simmons, the original commissioner, didn't push hard enough to get a better TV deal. But I don't know. You're an upstart league with no track record whatsoever, and your games are being televised on ESPN and ABC. It's pretty freaking good.
Yeah.
Oh, and I remember looking when they, were still saying, okay, we are play in 1986 and we have our schedule. And I remember looking at the Birmingham Stallions schedule.
Yeah.
They had a game scheduled on Christmas Day, which in Birmingham, which would have drawn about 20 people. And they had several games that would be going to head against Alabama and Auburn football games. They were just trying to work around the NFL schedule. And it was just seeing that, I'm thinking this is a disaster. I mean, because really the Stallions, their last season, as much as it was great football, I think they only averaged like 25,000 fans a game. And if they had moved to the fall, you're probably dealing with 10, 12,000 people a game, maybe.
I think one thing they didn't think about, or maybe they did and just didn't care, was so like a lot of people would point to that third season and say, well, attendance was down and blah, blah, blah. But you basically told everyone, by announcing you're moving to fall, you basically told everyone this league probably doesn't really matter anymore. So,
right.
And that really reduces incentive to attend a game. When you think you're attending a game, you're basically attending a funeral. So like a lot of the USFL's best season football wise was 1985. You had the best players. It was really exciting. Some of those teams definitely could have been not great NFL teams, but average to slightly poor NFL teams. But in Houston, why am I going to go see the Gamblers when I know they're not going to be here a year from now? Like, why do I even care about this? Doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, the last game that Birmingham played was against Baltimore in the playoffs. And the whole time I'm sitting at Legion Field, I'm thinking this most likely is the last time I'm ever going to see the Birmingham Stallions play. Yep. And, it was a brutally hot day in July or whatever. And there were only like 20,000 fans there. But I thought, man, this sucks. If this is their last game, this is a really sad way to go out. But it's for the reasons you mentioned. There were people who were already, I guess, sort of cutting their ties because they knew that the end was coming.
I remember interviewing Joe Cribbs, who was a running back who came over from the NFL, really, really good player, former Auburn player. And he told me like that last season, it just didn't really feel like professional football atmosphere wise. And And I think that was self-inflicted, and it's like you're Joe Cribbs and you're used to playing in front of 60,000 fans in Buffalo. And you come to this new league, and the first year he was there in '84 is great. And you feel it. You feel what's working here. And then 1 year later, it's just like a deflated balloon.
Yeah, I was at the Stallions season opener in '84 was against the Generals at Legion Field, and I think it drew 62,000.
Yeah.
And that was just, to me at that time in my life, that was the greatest football atmosphere I'd ever experienced, because the Generals had, Herschel Walker, Brian Sight, Stallions are coming on strong. They have, you had the hope that they were going to have a good season, and just being in that atmosphere with all those fans who were really into a great professional football game on a Sunday afternoon. I mean, that was, for somebody like me, I wasn't a kid anymore, but I was still young enough to really revel in being a fan. And that was just a tremendous experience.
I'll tell you something interesting about that. So a year later, I had to look this up, but I remembered it. The third game of the season, the Generals were back in Birmingham. They played the Birmingham Stallions. And this is '85 now. And the New Jersey Generals have Doug Flutie as their, and they already had Sight, but Trump, he has to go for the golden whatever ring. So he goes for Doug Flutie, and he makes him the highest paid player in football history, which is obviously insane. And he was interviewed by Keith Jackson before the game. And Donald Trump was talking about how you can already see Doug Flutie is paying all these dividends. Look at this crowd. This is amazing. This is Doug Flutie. And the crowd was 20,000 smaller, I think, than the year before Generals visiting Birmingham. It was just all a freaking con, it was like just a con. And I used to say, when I was researching the book, was when Trump was talking about the wall, building the wall, build the wall,
Right.
build the wall. And Doug Flutie, I always say, was the wall before the wall, because Donald Trump signed him and then sent a letter to all the other owners saying, you should be paying. You pay for Doug Flutie because I brought him here, but it's great. It's great. I've got him, but you're going to pay for him. And kind of like Mexico, the rest of the owners like, yeah, I don't really think so. We're not paying.
Yeah. Well, it's funny you bring that up during that whole campaign. So I would sit down and we would talk politics, and I'd be like, you know what, this whole wall idea has been brought up before. And I brought up your Doug Flutie, your book and about Doug Flutie. And it's amazing, just like the disconnect on generations. I mean, so we're all of the same age. We remember high school. I mean, but the younger generation, the lessons of the USFL and bringing that up, they're like, what? No, can't be true. And I mean, your book got, at least my copy of your book got handed around quite a bit for people to read about. This is history. This is why sports history, at least in 2016, mattered. But the whole issue of him, I mean, realistically, what did the owners, if I remember correctly, the owners basically told Trump to go screw himself.
I wasn't going to use screw, but yes, they actually said the word that rhymes with puck. Yeah, of course they did. It was ridiculous. But it's weird, though. It is interesting. I'm not judging anyone if you're a Republican or Democrat, truly.
Right.
In that little vacuum of time, his ability to sort of bully people into doing what he wanted and run over people to do what he wanted, in my opinion, is probably the number one factor for the USFL. Is he has this Svengali type ability to get people to do what he says and to convince people this is the way to be. And I'm going to bully you and bully you and bully you. And that was the thing he did really well. I'm going to hammer this and hammer this and hammer this point over and over and over again until you guys agree. And the guy, I have his letter literally hanging on my wall here, is the John Bassett letter.
Oh yeah. Love John Bassett.
Love John Bassett. John Bassett was I always say another parallel, like John Bassett, the owner of the Tampa Bay Bandits, was the one guy really willing to stand up to Trump and who saw through the BS. And when John Bassett was diagnosed with a brain tumor, I think Trump just saw it as an entranceway to stomp all over this guy, which he did.
Yeah.
And years later, when John McCain, also a guy willing to stand up to Trump, was diagnosed with a brain tumor.
Right.
I saw what Trump did. He was as unsympathetic as a human being can be. He remains that way. And there's just so many parallels. Weird working on the book as he was running. And the funny thing is, I just want to say, I've been wanting to write this book for years. It ended up, people are like, oh, did you plan it? No, nothing to do with Donald Trump running for president. It was just the weirdest timing that this long ago owner became president of the United States.
Right. And you, Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Scott. I'm sorry.
No, I was just saying that, one of the things that Bassett, he owned the Birmingham Bulls in the World Hockey Association. So he was kind of, so had developed a lot of fans, down here even before the USFL. But yeah, that's one thing that, Trump has always been vile, and the way he treated Bassett was horrific. But, looking back, I always wished, God, if there were just 3 or 4 owners with the balls of Bassett, who knows, maybe things would have turned out a little differently.
Wait, and I swear to God, I guess I will get a little political. I think that same thing about Liz Cheney now. If there were just 3 or 4 more people like Liz Cheney who are willing to stand up and not be bullied. I can't stand the bullying. Like, that's the number one thing I can't. I hate it with the USFL. I hate it now in politics. I hate that people give in to bullies. I hate it with my kids in school. I hate the bullying. And I feel like what he did in the USFL was really bully these other owners. And it's amazing because they were wealthy men. It was a time period, they're all white men, older white men who had success in real estate or this or that or that. And he just came along, and he was younger than most of them, but he had that I'm from New York, I get it. He had that like New York brashness, and that, hey, screw you, and this is what we're doing. And he would dress you down, and you'd have these genteel owners who are like, whoa, and I guess I got to listen to this guy. And all right, I don't want to cause any. And all of a sudden you turn around and they're moving to fall. You're like, what, how did that happen? The owner of the Pittsburgh Maulers, Eddie DeBartolo Sr., voted yes to move to the fall. What does that tell you? Like, there's no Jerry Argovitz, Houston Gamblers owner, voted to move to fall. Like, do you realize there's another football team that plays in this stadium, right? In the fall, that has a guy named Earl Campbell that's much more popular than you are. Like, what is this ridiculous?
Well, and it boggles the mind. I mean, their only hope, obviously, was the lawsuit, winning that lawsuit. And of course, we all know, hindsight looking, there was no chance in hell they were gonna win it. But were they that short-sighted in the sense that they couldn't see beyond, 5 feet in front of them, that they were bound to lose it no matter what?
I think you had different things. I don't think Trump really cared either way. He's called, you saw the 30 for 30 that Mike Tolan did. Like, he dismissed his small potatoes. And I think to him, if he won, he gets an NFL franchise. That's awesome. And if they lose, it's just another investment to me. I don't care.
But with that,
I do think.
go ahead. But with that said, Pete Rozelle was the commissioner at the time, and Pete Rozelle made it very clear he was not getting into the NFL.
Correct. But he was, again, I would say, if you want to look at Trump's keys to success, I actually say this sincerely.
Yeah.
The guy doesn't take no for an answer, and he charges ahead. And so Rozelle says, you and your heirs will never be a part of the NFL. And he basically, like, it's kind of weird, actually, in a way, like, he doesn't even hear it. It's kind of keeps going and keeps charging ahead, Try telling a bull he can't have any more whatever, broccoli or, whatever bulls eat. He's not going to be like, oh, that makes sense. He's just going to go for it and try to get it. Trump is the same way.
As taking a look at just what the USFL accomplished, years later, I think, Greg alluded to it earlier. A lot of kids don't really realize that, when you see the 2-point conversion and the coaches challenge and just salaries in general, that's just the way it is. But that wasn't the way it was until the USFL came along. And that's another, thing that happened with that league.
I even think, like, run and shoot offense, like the wide open sets is the USFL. Like you said, coach challenge, 2-point conversion. Also, just the influx of players, about 200 guys from the USFL wound up on it. I always say that the cool one, I have to remember to get the names right, but when the Washington Redskins beat Denver Broncos in the Super Bowl in, I think it was 87, Doug Williams, former Oklahoma Outlaw, was a quarterback. Touchdown, he threw 4 touchdown passes in that game. Kelvin Bryant, Philadelphia Baltimore Stars, caught one. Ricky Sanders caught one. And Gary Clark caught one. Those guys were USFL refugees to the NFL. So the impact of the USFL and the NFL in that little sliver tells you how big it was.
Right. I mean, it was high quality football. That was the one thing I remember, growing up watching the game. It's like, yeah, these guys can play. I mean, it's different, watching, say, what the XFL was in 2001 when you realize, these guys couldn't even make the practice squad on most players. But it was high quality football for the 3 years it was there.
I agree 100%. I love the USFL. I loved researching the book and like watching old clips of the USFL. I love the first game ever. The first game ever was the Chicago Blitz and the Washington Federals.
I watched that game. Yeah.
I love that game. It's a terrible game, but I love like the Blitz knew everything that was coming because, George Allen was their coach and he was dirty and he cheated and he sent guys in USFL jackets to videotape their practices and they just everything Washington was going to play. But like, there's such a cool, I love the opening 3 minutes of that game when Lou Rawls is singing the national anthem and Jim Lampley is in the booth.
Yeah.
He's basically saying, I don't know what's going to happen, but we'll take a shot on spring and see how it goes. And I remember being a kid. I really remember being a kid. I to someone the other day, it's like music, food, and sports are 3 things that can take us back. Where all of a sudden you hear something, you see something, and you just have that feeling again. It just overtakes your body. And when I watched that Federals Blitz, I remember being a kid in front of the TV watching this first game and seeing the Washington Federals in their weird green uniforms and the Blitz with the Blitz with the Z, and just being like, this is so freaking cool. So I love that. I love that. I love that YouTube has so many of those games on TV.
And speaking
and
of
since we're all logo.
Oh, go ahead, Scott. I'm sorry.
I'd like where this.
I just saying since we're all logo nerds, I was at the first Monday night game, which was the Stallions when they hosted the Michigan Panthers. And when I saw the Michigan Panthers helmets, I thought, my God, that's the greatest logo in the history of logos. I mean, forget that it was a 9-7 game and it was pretty boring and it was played in sleep. But, those uniforms were great. I've never forgotten how wonderful the Michigan Panthers unis were.
Also, their colors it wasn't like, they could have just said we're purple and whatever. They were champagne and whatever they were. Champagne.
And cream. We're champagne, cream, and something else. Yeah.
Burgundy.
There was only one color the USFL didn't have, and Scott and I talk about this a lot. We're both big World Football League fans of the magenta of the Southern California sun. So that's the one color. And my wife hates the color, so I love it even more just because my wife hates it. I love the San Antonio Gunslingers uniforms, just that mixture. Yeah.
I mean, because they're so preposterous. Like those uniforms were factually preposterous. Like they were the guy who looks like Woody, except he looks like a crack addict on the helmet.
Yeah.
I was a huge, I thought this is really nerdy, but I thought when the Oklahoma Outlaws moved to and kind of spiced up their uniforms, they were really badass. And I also liked the Arizona Wrangler with the brand, the W brand on the helmet.
Mm-hmm.
Those are cool.
Yeah.
See, that's one thing I didn't like about, I love the Stallions, but I didn't like their logo. It was like a really tired horse. Yeah, and I know when they named them the Stallions, I thought, this will be cool. Have 3 or 4 stallions on their helmets and there'll be, some sort of smoke or something. And then you just see this little horse kind of, on the side.
They were definitely not. There's no one in the world who's like best USFL helmet, Birmingham Stallions.
Yeah, exactly.
The Generals, I was from New York. The Generals were the same way. It was like, it's fine.
Yeah. I did like Jacksonville though. Jacksonville, and that their helmet, not only with the helmet, but just the fan support down there. And it, to talk about Jacksonville now in the NFL, people forget that back in the heyday, that was where the USFL. I mean, you talk about a team that's a town that supported its USFL team. Jacksonville did.
Well, you can also say we were talking about the impact before, and Jacksonville isn't an NFL franchise. There's no Jacksonville Jaguars in Jacksonville if the Jacksonville Bulls weren't there. It wasn't even
right.
Jacksonville's a ridiculous NFL city in a lot of ways, like size-wise. It's not really an NFL city. It's a college football town. There's a lot of it'd be, in a way, it's a poor man's Birmingham as far as like where should we have an NFL team. It's not as cool a city as Birmingham. It doesn't have as passionate a fan base for football as Birmingham. There's not a history of football like there is, not the same way as there is in Birmingham. But the Bulls came along and they really jacked it up, and people love that team. And they did something smart, which is the colors of the team were Florida State, Florida, and Georgia combined, which I thought was kind of cool. And also they were really fun. Lindy Infante was their coach. They ran a really fun brand of football. They were high flying. They brought in a lot of cool, they brought in Mike Rozier, and they had Brian Sipe and Keith Bard was there. Like they definitely tried.
Yeah, and Larry Zonk, I think, was part owner, wasn't he?
I talked to Larry Zonk. One of the coolest things about researching this book, was just a crazy number of people I talked to, like Larry Zonka. Oh, Larry, it's like Larry Zonka was the GM of the Paul Larry Zonka. And like, it was just a who's who, besides like the Steve Youngs, who was great, and Jim Kelly and Doug Williams, guys were great. But like the weirdness of like Larry Zonka, like, what's he doing there? I love that stuff.
And he cuts his thumb to be on the cover of one of their programs, I believe, didn't he? I think there's a program of a guy holding a helmet, Zonka, who'd cut his thumb so it would bleed.
Is that true?
I believe so. Yeah, I believe.
I didn't know that one.
That
you got
for
me
a photo shoot.
Yeah. Oh, that's
Did
awesome.
you talk to Dan Jiggets up here in Chicago about his days with the Blitz?
Yeah, I did, because Dan Jiggets told me, wait, did I? Yeah. There's a story in the book about it. So I'm trying to think if I got it from him. I think I got it from, I must have gotten it from him, where he's because the greatest thing in the USFL ever is the Blitz Wranglers trade. It's the best thing ever, because it's it's so preposterously pathetic that it's awesome. It's one of those things. It's so bad, it's good. And the owner of the Blitz in '83 is Ted Dietrich, who's an Arizona-based surgeon, and he doesn't want to keep flying to Chicago for games. So the big solution is, let's just trade everybody for each other. It's so preposterous. Like, I don't really want to make these. I'm a wealthy man. I don't want to make 3-hour flights 9 times a year. So how about we just swap the franchises? Oh, okay. That's a great idea. Let's do that. And Jiggets told me the new Blitz were owned by a guy named James Hoffman, who had far less money than anyone thought he had. And the new Blitz were terrible. They were the old Wranglers. They were a terrible team. Marv Levy was the coach.
Yep.
Marv Levy was unaware that he was taking over this crappy team. He thought he was getting the good Blitz. He had no idea. He just hired to coach the Blitz. He looks at the paper. He's like, oh, they were pretty good. They were 12-6 last year, or whatever they were. And Dan Jiggets told me after, I think it was the third game, maybe, walking off the field talking to James Hoffman, who's the owner of the team. And Hoffman's like, yeah, I'm taking off. And Jiggets is like, oh, where are you going this weekend? He's like, no, I'm done. What do you mean? I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to own this team anymore. So I'm just leaving. He literally just he treated the Chicago Blitz like he was driving a 72 Buick with like a wheel falling off. And it's just like, I'm just going to leave this on the side of the road and hitchhike home. Just dump the team. And the league had to take over.
Free to good home.
And the best part is the GM of the team, then I forgot what led this, but he's in his office calling different local sports radio stations. He's locked in his office. I think he'd just been fired after Hoffman left. And he's basically calling everyone going like, this place is crazy. This place is crazy. I got to get out of here. This place is crazy. It's like the best. They almost got Walter Payton. Walter Payton almost signed with the Blitz before that year.
Really?
Which would have been a disaster, because they offered him money they couldn't pay. So Walter Payton was about to break the NFL's all-time rushing leader. If there's one guy who shouldn't have gone to the USFL, it's Walter Payton.
Right. Well, they got Vince Evans, if I recall.
I would say Vince Evans is no Walter Payton.
Right. True.
And he almost jumps, and he wouldn't have broken the. Well, he probably. I mean, I don't know what would have happened. He would have 5 games. The checks wouldn't have cleared, and he probably would have gone back to the Bears.
Yeah. And then of course there's the Gunslingers too. I mean, your stories about the Gunslingers. It's a chapter unto itself, which is fascinating to read. And it's no wonder why the NFL hasn't tried going back to San Antonio after reading that chapter.
I mean, the best thing.
What was it that?
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, it's like, I know. I'm just saying, it wasn't that the one where Neuheisel was talking about how when it was payday, everybody just made a mad rush to the bank just to make sure that there was money there.
The best thing sometimes when you these things, you find little nuggets of information, and you're like, that is the best thing ever. The San Antonio Gunslingers once put a guy on the injured list because he slammed his penis in a trunk.
Oh God. Oh, there's a lot to unpack there.
Wait, the Gunslingers signed a punter because the owner of the team, he was the owner's ranch hand, and he had punted in high school. His nickname was Bucky, and the owner was dissatisfied with the punter they had at the time. So he signed the ranch hand and forces him. Jim Bates was a coach, and says to Jim Bates, here's your new punter. Jim Bates says, who is this guy? He's my ranch hand, but he was really good in high school. And then he shows up in practice and he can't punt more than like 15 yards without the thing shanking off his foot.
Oh, jeez.
I love everything about that team. That could be a movie, that could be a book unto itself. I don't think enough people would buy it for it to be a sustainable book, but
it almost sounds like a plot line. What was it? North, God, it was one of those.
North Dallas 40.
North Dallas 40.
Yeah, something. Yeah.
Or a million movies. It's a million movies. It's Major League. It's North Dallas 40. It's the Replaceables, whatever that was called. Yeah, it's a million of those movies.
Yeah.
It's real.
Now with that said, I mean, there were other franchises and the Denver Gold. I mean, when you had with the Denver Gold, that was a pretty stable franchise, wasn't it?
It was. First 2 years, they were great. They were the first team in the USFL to make money, actually.
Yeah.
I think they were the only team in '83 who turned a profit.
Okay.
And also they went about it a very wise way. If you look at the Denver Gold and you think, oh, who's the big player in the Denver Gold? Harry Sidney, probably. You know, like they had Vince Evans for a while, Bob Gagliano, like they weren't going after huge stars. And that was a smart way to go. Slow and steady wins a race.
And they had Red Miller too. I think he was coaching it. Then Craig Morton coached it too.
Yeah, Red Miller got fired after I was trying to strangle the general manager. Never a good idea. Never a good idea to try to strangle the general manager. But yeah, the Denver Gold were great, but then the third year again, attendance plummeted because you're not going to be watching this team next year because you're not going to pick them over the Broncos to play in fall football. So
yeah. And then, talking about Denver, that first title game out in Denver, I didn't realize that there was a riot after the game until I read your book.
It's the best. I'm telling you that the joy of research is like you're going along and you think you know, and then you realize you don't know. Like I didn't remember that at all. And then I found an old New York Daily News clip about people rioting. And then you start talking to people. I talked to a woman who is the publicist for the USFL, and she's in the press box working it's a post game, and she's handing out in post game in a press box. You hand out sheets with stats and information, and someone's like, "There's a riot on the field," and she's like, "What?" And she turns around. There's like police hitting kids with billy clubs and like dogs, and this is like it's so USFL. Like this is USFL's great moment. This game was awesome. You have this definitive moment of Anthony Carter leaping into the end zone and scoring on this, jolt down the field. Bobby Hebert hitting him with it. The two great teams of the USFL, two legitimately great football battling back and forth. Sam Mills and, all these guys and Chuck Fusina and Kelvin Bryant. It's this great game. It's nationally televised. The Super Bowl at the time, the Super Bowls one after another were not competitive.
Right.
This game was super competitive. It was beautiful. Mm-hmm. And then there's a riot on the field. Yeah. And then you read the next day stories, and a lot of them are about USFL held its first championship game yesterday, marred by a riot that took place immediately after. It's like, oh, yeah, it's funny.
Oh man,
yeah, and but then so they in '84 they had where was the title game in '84? Wasn't that that wasn't in Denver and that wasn't in New Jersey? They played that.
It was in Arizona. Wasn't it Arizona? No, Arizona played it. You're testing me here. I would think of it, but I'm not sure.
Yeah. So were there any other incidents like that after, that riot after the first title game? Were there anything, crowd-wise, anything that comes to mind that happened after that?
One of the best is, I was trying to look up where the championship game was. One of the best was Cliff Stout returns to Pittsburgh. You're Cliff Stout of the Birmingham Stallions.
Oh, yeah.
Returns to Pittsburgh to play the Maulers in the second season. And Stout was hated in Pittsburgh. He'd been Bradshaw's backup. Then he sucked. Then he went to the Stallions, and Steeler fans were like, how dare this guy? So they all show up with Cliff Stout went into town and like checked into his room without using his name because he was really nervous about. And it's an icy cold day in Pittsburgh. And the game it wasn't a sellout, but it was close to a sellout just because Cliff Stout was coming back. And during the game, they're throwing ice chunks at him. And they're throwing frozen beer bottles at him. And it was a total, complete disaster. And then at the end of the game, I think the end of the game, the Maulers coach, Joe Pendry, went to his car and the tires were slashed. It was a very Pittsburgh. Man. It did not work out that well.
Oh, wow. Wow. Oh, wow. Yeah, no, it's amazing too. Just the difference in time. It's been 40 years since then. And yeah, you don't get those stories today. I mean, we've got crap that happens all the time, but the stories in your book were just, I mean, literally, I mean, like you said, the USFL, the whole story of the USFL could be a movie unto itself with those stories.
I agree. I just want to say championship game was played in Tampa. I don't know why I didn't remember that.
Oh,
Second
that's
game was in
right.
Tampa.
Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah, it's great. And the thing is, like, I just don't think we talked early about, and before you started recording, about the quote, new USFL.
Yeah.
And I guess the thing I feel about this, because I have gotten asked about it a decent amount. It's like saying, like, it's like if the members of KISS all died and they took Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley makeup and put on two guys who sang like them. This is just an example.
Right.
And you're like, KISS is back. KISS is back. And it's like, yeah, but that's not KISS. That's guys dressed up like KISS. Like that's not actually I'm not saying this as a KISS fan, I'm just saying as an example, or the Rolling Stones are back. We have these guys. He looks just like Mick Jagger. Another guy looks just like Keith. They're back. Like you can't recapture what the beauty of the USFL was the weirdness of the USFL.
Right.
And that's what made it so cool. And that's why the stories are so funny. So like, I'm not against anyone I thought the uniforms are cool. So I think it's neat, but it's not the US. It's not just putting a name on it. It's just kind of silly. It feels like a weird, but there aren't that many people like us who are that nostalgic for the USFL to even attempt to do that gimmick.
Yeah.
See, that's the thing with me. I mean, I wrote something the other day, which is basically just what you said. I mean, I wish, especially with, the hub being in Birmingham or whatever, I want it to succeed wherever it turns out to be. But yeah, they're not going to sign the next Heisman Trophy winner. They're not going to outbid the NFL for talent. And they're not, so those days are over. And I wish they would call themselves something else, and I know that's silly, but just I have such a, strong feeling and strong line with the original USFL. If they'd gone ahead and called themselves the National Spring Football League, I would feel a whole lot better about it. But,
But isn't it more, don't you find it more confusing than anything? Like, I don't even get why they're calling themselves the USFL. Like, again, like, we're dinosaurs. Like, there aren't that many people like us who are like, I guarantee you, like, nobody under the age of 35, 40 is clamoring for the US. I love the USFL. I wrote the book about the USFL. Clearly, you guys love the USFL. But none of us are, no one besides us is clamoring for the return of the USFL. So it's a weird choice. I just don't actually get it.
Yeah. And also, too, with that said, I mean, with spring football and everybody's been trying to make spring football go, all of us have been, can say, you know what, we've been there, done that. And history has shown that, yeah, I mean, great, let's try it, but don't get your hopes up for it because it's just, I mean, the NFL has become so dominant now. And, we've become so fractured in terms of media. I mean, forget politics. I mean, just media in general. You've got 50 different choices just on one TV in terms of what you can watch.
Well, that's a big thing. That's a huge thing. And also just the, like when the USFL came along, the NFL was a big sneaker. And now the NFL is like a steel-toed boot. Like
Right.
It's so much more powerful as then. And the NFL has become a year-round endeavor. That's a huge difference too.
Yeah.
If it's not the games, it's the combine. If it's not the combine, it's the draft. If it's not the draft, it's free agency, which is a much bigger thing now. There really wasn't free agency back then. So you have to have very, very low expectations if you have a spring football league. You're not going to compete with the NFL. You're not going to get great ratings. You're not going to get the best players. It's a heavy, heavy, heavy load to bear.
Yeah. And even with that said, I mean, even the NFL with the World League of American Football and the NFL Europe, they couldn't even get spring football to be successful.
It's very hard. Also, I just want to say, I hope you guys have read it. Did you read the book that Paul Reiths wrote about the USFL?
Wait, say that again?
There's a writer named Paul Reiths. I just want this book. Hold on. If you guys haven't read this book, did you read this?
I haven't. You know what? I have it on my bookshelf, but I have not read it.
This book, I'm not kidding. If you're like a diehard USFL guy, this book, Paul Reiths wrote this book. It's so good. Like, it's super micro. It's all about the USFL and like the intricacies of the USFL. It came out when I saw this book was coming out right before mine. Crap, but it was like a small publisher and Paul wasn't that well known and blah, blah, blah.
Right.
It's so freaking good. It's so freaking good. And it's like, I always feel when I'm talking about the USFL, it's worth bringing up that there's this amazing also other book that came out around the same time. That's just as good as mine. And also and delves into these topics.
Yeah. Is it comparable to the $1 League, which I mean I have in my collection, but I know that's a hard book to get a copy of nowadays.
Yeah, it's I have that book here too. It's better than a $1 League. Better
Okay.
than yeah, it's really good. It's super, super micro. Like if you really love the USFL, like my book, I would almost say like my book was more for a bigger audience. I was trying to, I couldn't, it was hard to justify a publishing deal and telling my, Howard Mifflin publishers that only USFL fans are going to love this book. So I was much more about sort of the antics and the crazy.
Right.
This is much more about the nitty gritty of the league itself. It's really, really good. Anyway, I always like bringing his book up because it's freaking fantastic.
Cool. And hey, Scott, I'm going to let you field the last question before we let Jeff go. So I know Jeff's got other podcasts to do today. And so Scott, last question's yours.
This better be a good question, Scott.
Yeah. I don't know if it's good or not, but for me, I keep thinking, okay, there is no move to the fall. The original USFL decides, okay, we're just going to stick to the spring. In my fantasy world, I'm thinking, oh, we have year-round football forever. But I know that's probably not going to happen. Just pure conjecture. How long do you think a league like that, had they stuck to their original plan, could have hung around before the NFL just decided to kill it by, absorbing franchises or whatever?
I think eventually what would have happened, and not that distant into the future, because you have to admit the NFL had a player strike a few years later. And I think the USFL would have, if the USFL had remained on course a little bit, would have taken full advantage of that. And you see swooping up of a ton of players. I think the NFL was really the USFL. Like clearly they were scared of the USFL. You can't lose three high. What if they lost a fourth straight Heisman Trophy winner and a fifth straight Heisman Trophy winner? Right. What if Bo Jackson comes out of Auburn and a functioning USFL? Remember, Bo Jackson did not want to play for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So let's say Bo Jackson can play for the Birmingham Stallions. He can live at home and he's super close with his mom. I'm going to play in Birmingham. What if Bo Jackson, because then Herschel Walker, Bo Jackson, those are bombshell signings. That's not Doug Flutie, who wasn't really going to be a great player, or Mike Rozier, who's just a very good running back. Those are bombshell pillar signings. What if the USFL is doing that? Then the discussion in the NFL office has to be, we just need to put an end to this. Let's take Memphis. Let's take Birmingham. Let's take Jacksonville. Let's take Baltimore. And let's take one more team. And let's just make them an offer that will merge and we'll buy out the other teams and give them this money. We just need this to go away. And I do think the USFL would not be around at this age, but the Birmingham Stallions would be. They'd be in the NFL. You might have a Super Bowl ring.
Oh man, that's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Fun to think about, but still heartbreaking.
It was really, I mean, the funny thing about Trump challenging the NFL is he did it way too early.
Right.
He just did it too early. I mean, he did it wrong a million different ways, but they weren't ready yet to challenge the NFL in the way they did. And it turned into a disaster.
Right. Yeah. So they had pretty much, a couple more seasons, it could have happened.
I think so. I think so. Yeah.
Well, Jeff, with that said, hey, thank you very much for joining us. And what do you have before we let you go? What do you got? First of all, where everybody can find you, what do you got coming out next? Because I know when I first reached out to you, you were working on something.
I alluded to him. I'm doing a Bo Jackson biography.
Oh, that's right. Okay. Yeah. Sorry.
So, yeah. And I have a podcast called Two Writers Sling and Yang. And I have a Substack newsletter at Pearlman.substack.com. That's it. Easy peasy.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. And you've got some other great books too, I've read. And I know, you've got the one on Brett Favre is a great one.
Oh, thanks. Wait, true story about this. I just want to say the publishing house did not want a USFL book. And because I pitched it, rejected, didn't want it. And I said, what if I do a Favre book? If I do a Favre book for a little less money, will you give me a deal to do the USFL book? And my agent literally said at one point, nobody wants an effing USFL book. And I was like, I want this book. And I pitched, so I attached it to Favre. And he said, you have to write Favre first. And I said, okay. So I wrote Favre, then wrote the USFL. The greatest moment probably of my writing career was a USFL book making the New York Times bestseller list, because nobody thought that was a book that could sell at all. And it just warmed my heart. It truly warmed my heart because I love the USFL. And I love that people are asking me about the USFL, and that somehow that keeps it, at least memory-wise, alive a little bit more. So that does a lot for me. Yeah.
Well, and it's absolutely fantastic too.
Yeah.
Just a great book.
And I love the book so much that, anytime you were on TV, I tuned in. I even did a YouTube search because I wanted to hear more stories from you that maybe weren't in the book. So, and when you were on Eisen's show, that was, my wife's like, "What are you doing?" I go, "No, I got to watch this because this is."
Were you the creepy guy stalking me and sending me?
No,
that you? I think those letters. Like I'm watching you. You look familiar. No, I appreciate that. That's very kind of you. I really appreciate that. That's cool. Yeah.
All right. Well, Jeff, thank you very much. And stand by before we let you. We're going to sign off here, but we'll talk to you on the flip side of this. And again, thank you very much for joining us.
All right, my pleasure.
Thank you.
See him on the street, then tip your hat his way. You'll know just where he's headed and which game he's gonna play. He's a sharp shooting gunman and always aiming high. He'll win any gunfight, his limit is the sky. We're the Gunslingers from San Antoin. We're the Gunslingers on the road or at home. Remember the Alamo, for such as we are known. We're the Gunslingers from San Antoin. When we're away, we're doing our job. We're keeping law and order at home and abroad. Gamblers and outlaws, you better step aside. Our motto is to shoot 'em up and bring 'em back alive. We're the Gunslingers from San Antoin. We're the Gunslingers on the road or at home. Remember the Alamo, for such as we are known. We're the Gunslingers from San Antoin. So if you love Texas and the USA, and if you love football, you'll love to see us play. We'll be shooting up the score and always aiming high. We'll be slinging guns and having fun until the day we die. We're the Gunslingers from San Antoin. The Gunslingers on the road or at home. Remember the Alamo, for such as we are known. We're the Gunslingers from San Antoin. We're the Gunslingers from San Antoin.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.